to talk to Ben Matthews today about design thinking. He's a lecturer in the School of Information Technology and Electrical Engineering. Welcome, Ben.
Thanks.
Ben, what's design thinking?
A lot of different things to different people, but it's the term that's been picked up in the last decade or so to talk about mainly the way that designers work, and to differentiate that, for instance, from the way that other disciplines or other fields of study tend to treat the problems that they deal with.
So how do designers treat problems, or how do they work?
I think part of what's encapsulated in the idea of design thinking is a contrast between especially the way that engineers would deal with problems. So talk about design thinking, for instance, being holistic versus engineering thinking being sort of reductionist, where this, I think engineers, I'm an engineer, so I don't feel too bad slagging them off here. But engineers tend to treat problems by decomposing them into sort of separate elements that you can solve individually, and then sort of add them together at the end. And I think part of what's meant with design thinking is sort of a more holistic understanding that that the world doesn't just break up into these neatly distinct problems that can be individually solved, and that can be put together.
So how does it work, design thinking? What do you do?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the reasons I don't like the label design thinking is that design isn't just a cognitive process, right? And design thinking tends to sort of mentalize the design process. I think I'd much rather think of design thinking as a practice, as something that people do. To answer that question. And I think a lot of what designers do has to do with understanding the nature of the problems they're dealing with. And those problems, designers like to call those problems wicked. And they're wicked problems in the sense, not in evil sense, but in the sense that they're difficult to tame.
So what kinds of problems has design thinking been used to address then?
Typically design thinking is seen to be useful for issues. I would rather talk about them as issues rather than problems, where a determinate answer hasn't been worked out. We don't know what a good solution to this issue might look like. And when we start to address the issue in design, so when we start making proposals or building prototypes and imposing them onto a situation, we learn more about the issue that we're treating. Right? And so design in itself then is a type of inquiry where we're understanding more about the world as we try to impose solutions or ideas on it. And that talks back to us, and then we create a different version of that or a different kind of solution and impose that again. So I think that's part of that practice is obviously conceptualizing ideas, building prototypes, imposing them, but it's also very much doing research, understanding the kinds of issues that we're trying to treat, understanding the different perspectives on those issues that people have, and involving people outside the design process into the design process so that those perspectives can be understood.
So it's heavily focused on people, isn't it?
Yes.
This approach.
Certainly the kind of design that we teach, there are different philosophies of design, but the kind of design that we teach would be people-centered design. Because
they're the people who are experiencing the world, and they're the people that you have to solve the problems for?
I would say, yeah. I mean, I think that's definitely, we're looking at addressing needs or issues that arise in the course of people's lives. And we're looking at trying to understand how those issues might be resolved with products or systems or technologies or even different social arrangements.
And these types of problems, they cross across all aspects of life and society?
I think if you look at the original ideas, I mentioned wicked problems before, but if you look at the original ideas that were formulated in that space, they were to do with urban design, town planning, as much as they were to do with different technologies. So yes, they're the kinds of things that cross. I think the thing that makes design different, say, than to art, shall we say, is that it's dealing with things that we produce, that we create ourselves, but that we deploy, that have some value to people in their lives. But certainly it cuts across a lot of different disciplines.
You mentioned before prototypes.
Mm-hmm.
Is that part of the design thinking process, developing prototypes?
Absolutely. I mean, and prototypes understood broadly in terms of some kind of concrete manifestation of the ideas that or the solutions that you're trying to propose. But yes.
So what happens with the prototypes? So they're then tested and used by the people?
I'd like to talk about it as, again, evaluation more than testing. So that I think with testing you're often looking for a specific answer to a specific question. But I think with a lot of the things that designers create, they don't know precisely how those are going to be experienced or what issues are going to be arised with those. So you give them to people, or you introduce your prototypes to people. You let them live with them if you can, and you see what kind of feedback you get from that. And in that way you deepen your understanding of those issues.
Design thinking seems to be becoming quite popular in business as well.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'd much rather someone from business talk about why they're particularly interested in design. But I think the companies that have become very successful in the world, the companies that have made a lot of money in the last decade or two, have been technology companies and have been known very well for their design. So it's I think in that respect, people are looking to design as a model for how to be successful. But I also think there's been a greater understanding of the fact that the kinds of problems that people or the kinds of products that add value to people's lives are things that have been very carefully designed. And there is a lot of opportunity there for greater consideration to be given to how we're shaping the world that we're living in.
So design is a lot more than aesthetics then?
Certainly. I think a common misconception of design is that it's something that you can do at the end. You know, you develop a solution and then you give it to a designer and they'll pretty it up for you. But the kind of design that we're talking about is something that actually is at the very start of that process. It's understanding the problems and the issues that you want to address. And it's a process where you're involving people and building things together and evaluating them as a means of trying to address that. Aesthetics is important. It's not irrelevant to design, but it certainly isn't synonymous with it.
So it seems like a very powerful approach, design thinking, in that it can be applied to many tricky situations, but is there anything that it's not good for?
I think there are a lot of times where you don't want to run a design process, partly because the kind of problem you want to solve you already know a lot about, and you know how to get
Right.
a kind of solution. You don't think design, one of the things that it does well is to continually redefine the problem that it's solving, right? Because you don't have a complete understanding of any problem, any design problem when you start. But there's some problems where that's wasting a lot of time. Redefining the problem is wasting a lot of time in getting to somewhere where it would actually.
So does it lend itself to an ultimate solution then?
I mean, we always tell our students that design is never finished.
Right.
So that every deployment, even in a product that's mass produced and deployed, you're still learning about the issues you're dealing with in how that's being used and abused and misused, and that's more information for the next iteration. So design, you're always design. Even people who are using products, we'd like to think of them as designing the products they use in how they use those creatively.
Okay, thanks very much.